the second of our first Wednesday autumn series. I'm Caroline and I'm working with Koloff, and I would just like to welcome you all this evening. Really looking forward to this event. And some of you might be aware that Koloff has been running these first Wednesdays for about 20 years now. And really the purpose of them is to really connect with local issues and connect with communities and activists and make that solidarity link between the local and global, and start to get together, like to come up with collective actions for transforming the world. A couple of things to mention. We're recording this session, but you won't be seen. It'll only be the speakers who'll be seen on camera. And also we would like to thank Concern, who sponsors and is our main funder for this event. And also we host this event in partnership with Maynooth University, the Department of International Development. So a big thank you to Maynooth University too. And on that, I will just hand over to Tom, who will get things going and get us off to a good start here. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Caroline. Yeah, as Caroline says, my name is Tom Campbell and I work with the Department of International Development in Maynooth University. So we in the department, we go back a long way with Koloff, and we're delighted to be part of this particular seminar series exploring commonalities in global citizenship and activism, of which is the second in the series. So it kicked off last month, and I know there'll be another one in December, which my colleague Paul O'Keefe will be moderating. So tonight, as you all know, obviously the theme is extractivism, and what that means in particular for rural communities who, I guess when it comes to the environmental social impacts, are indeed on the front line of this growing trend. And I guess a trend that ironically in part is driven, as we may hear tonight, by the growth in green technologies designed to reduce our carbon footprint. So that's an interesting phenomenon. And I suppose in recent times, in part because of the supply chain disruption caused by COVID-19, and I suppose more recently the war in Ukraine, we see a trend now of European countries increasingly seeking to develop their own mineral supplies as they desperately search for resources, meaning that the kinds of destructive forms of mining are no longer confined to what we call the global south. So in effect, we can say that mining is really coming home. But for many of us here in Ireland, and I include myself, we're perhaps unaware of this trend until it actually arrives on our doorsteps. But interestingly, as a consequence of all of this, many people around Ireland now, many ordinary citizens, have been transformed into activists by the threat of mining or prospecting, or indeed fracking was the case in Leitrim and elsewhere up until recently. But in doing so, they're also building alliances and finding commonality with similar struggles in Latin America and elsewhere. So tonight, we're very pleased to hear directly from three activists who are closely involved in their own ways, in different ways, as we'll hear, in the kinds of local resistance to mining that's taking place in their communities or in the communities they work with. And in a way, through their work, they're forging new forms of global citizenship and collective learning. And that's, I suppose, the point of this session today. So just to introduce our first speakers, as you may have seen already, but the first guest speaker or panel member is Ramon Morales Balcazar, who is the founder of Fundación Tanti, a small nonprofit created in San Pedro de Atacama, Chile. And Ramon is also coordinator of the Plurinational Observatory of Andean Salt Flats, which is essentially a cross-border collective that brings together indigenous leaders, activists, and researchers from Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, around the protection of the Andean salt flats and wetlands. So Ramon, I understand you've been in Ireland before, so we're delighted to have you join us here tonight again, or remotely this time, from, I understand you're in Chile, is that right?
Hello, thanks for the invitation. It's nice to be here.
Yeah.
Actually, I was in Ireland a couple of months ago, but now I'm in Mexico.
Oh, in Mexico. Excellent, excellent. So I guess it's morning there, it's nighttime here.
Midday. kind of
You
a
did.
little bit later.
Great, Ramon. And I'll come back to you in a second. So I'm going to just introduce our two other speakers. Our second panel member is Linda Sullivan, who is an activist with the All Ireland Network Communities Against Injustice of Mining. And Linda has previously worked with a number of human rights and environmental organizations in Ireland and Latin America. She's now a freelance consultant with the Environmental Justice Network Ireland and the Yes to Life, No to Mining Global Network. So you're very welcome, Linda. And I'm very delighted to introduce and welcome our third panel member, who's Bernadette Hopkins, who is an artist or visual performance artist and activist. And she's currently based in Donegal. And Bernadette is part of the Save Inishowen from Gold Mining. She's also a member of the Communities Against Injustice of Mining and Nature Ireland. So what I thought I'd do, guys, is if I'd start by maybe asking each of you in turn to tell us a little bit about what's happening in the communities where you are based, or indeed with whom you may work, and how these communities are responding. And perhaps, I suppose, your personal story or personal engagement in all of this. I thought maybe, Ramon, would you like to kick off and tell us a bit more?
Oh, sure. Yeah, actually, so I've been living in San Pedro Atacama. This is in the north of Chile. It's like a small portion of the big Atacama Desert. It's a highland, and it's where most of lithium extraction is going on today. Okay, so it's actually it's a little bit part of the same work. My PhD studies, and that's why I'm in Mexico City right now, because my program is here in Mexico. So I have this scholarship actually that allows me actually to conduct this research and connect it with my activism. So yeah, basically the situation is like the expansion of lithium mining in these very fragile ecosystems. And this is a direct consequence of the implementation of electromobility as a strategy of mitigation of climate change. So from very local perspective, we defend these ecosystems. We defend all the life that is contained in this Indian wetland. Indigenous communities, also non-indigenous communities, but all of them rural modes of living, biodiversity, of course, and a lot of archaeological heritage, and so on. In the national at the national level, I'd say that our work is mostly concentrated in a critique to the extractivist development model that is very characteristic of Latin America. It's also a result of colonial history, but it's today also imposed by the global economy, let's say. And we also connect all this with the problem of the so-called energy transition and a more critical perspective actually about the crisis itself. We understand what we call as climate change as a symptom of a much wider problem or wider crisis. So this global crisis, what we think is that it's more like a systemic crisis. It's a crisis of capitalism, and hence we cannot resolve the crisis with electric cars or with more green markets or green technologies, let's say. So this can be maybe a part of the solution, but not the solution necessarily. And of course, we need to decolonize the imaginary of the transition itself. And it's kind of, I also like the work we do. I'm also a member of Just to Life, Not to Mining. That's actually how I got to meet Linda, to visit Ireland. In the last months, I was also in Serbia, where the lithium mining projects are also being stopped by rural communities. We are also connected with communities in the Nevada desert, in the US, here in Mexico, also in Portugal and Spain. And we know also that actually as Tom just mentioned that the problem of extractivism today, it's not a problem that concerns only countries in the global south, but also peripheral territories in the so-called global north. So yeah, I think that's basically it. I can pass it to the next person. I hope my English is not too bad. Sorry, it's okay. Okay.
You're on mute there, Tom.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ramon, and we'll come back to you. And obviously, I know there's a long history of extractivism in Latin America, so these are kind of new forms of extractivism, and maybe we can talk a bit more about that later. So maybe I'll go to Bernadette next, if that's okay. Bernadette, you're in Donegal, is that right?
Yes, so yeah, I'm in Donegal, and a number of years ago, just to sort of explain how I ended up sort of working in this area, is a number of years ago. I started a research project. I looked around in Donegal, and you know, we're on a periphery, really. We're surrounded by water up here and a contested border sort of on one side. And you know, I started looking at sort of the impoverished communities I was living in. I wanted to work as an artist within those communities. I always had great interest, strong interest in different types of politics. And, you know, I was doing a master's at the time with Limerick School of Art. I had worked as a nurse before I ever went to art college in Derry during the Troubles. So I had a big interest in human rights as well. So I started a research project looking at the fishing community in my own area, and looking at sort of how the small farmers and the small fishing communities sort of try to make a living, and how important it is that the land and the water is protected in order to sustain them and to sustain the rest of us here. So that sort of led into doing a couple of sort of art practice-based performances with the community after doing research. And through that, I started looking at Indigenous people and how they had started to long time ago protect their land and try and keep sort of their future sustainable. And in looking at that, I was looking at the governance and how communities have or have not, you know, governance over themselves and their health and those issues. So I started researching Indigenous people's, you know, different manifestos they'd drawn up to protect their lands, and to also demand from their governments protection of their health, you know, due to pollution. And then I was looking at outside polluters coming in, like mining companies particularly. So I started looking at mining in Donegal and the different licenses that were being given out, and sort of realized, you know, that most people didn't know that this was even happening, and started to research it a bit further, and, you know, then realized the extent of it all over Ireland. And, you know, the 27% of Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, and 25% of Northern Ireland has been concessioned for mining. So I, you know, obviously that led to more and more research. I worked with it through art, but also as an activist, and became more involved in the groups, and particularly in Inishowen, because there was already a sort of a strong kind of activism happening there, and they had been trying to stop, you know, prospecting licenses from being reissued and that. So also at that stage, I went to Sperrins, and I went to a conference that was Friends of the Earth, Northern Ireland. Linda was, I think, organising that conference, and there I met some people from South America who, you know, particularly was impressed with Karina Flores, and she was the niece of Berta Flores. So I had actually done quite a bit of research around Berta years beforehand. So it sort of, you know, started from there, and meeting the people in the Sperrins that were Save Our Sperrins people that were trying to protect their land against gold mining coming in to the area. So that's really how I got involved. And then I started meeting activists in Inishowen and around Donegal, and we started working together. And there was a lot of them had great experience in community work, environmental legalities. So there was a really strong team of us started. We thought we would, you know, it was really at this stage COVID had hit, so it was a lot of the meetings were online. But yeah, we started meeting very regularly and built up, you know, a strong kind of interest from the community, different interest groups in the community, and we started then to connect with other people all over the island. And it was very much thanks to Linda and Save Our Sperrins that networking started, really. So maybe Linda would like to talk a wee bit about, you know.
Well, thank you very much, Bernadette, and I look forward to hearing, you know, I'd be interested to hear more about how you use art, for example, but also maybe around how communities, you know, I know is very divisive up in the whole Shell to Sea and all that, you know, how communities are responding to these themes, and maybe something Linda might address as well, but we'll certainly come back, and that's really good to hear. And I was certainly shocked when I heard those figures about 25% of Ireland. It's something completely new to me. But anyway, Linda, would you like to tell us a few words about how you're involved in all of this?
Yeah, and thanks to Bernadette and Ramon. Yeah, so I suppose I came into this a number of years ago. Well, it was quite a number of years ago when I was interning with Amnesty in Dublin, and it was the former head of COLAV, Mark Cummings, who invited over a group of women from Guatemala to talk about how their communities had been destroyed by mining projects, and particularly one woman who lost her husband because he was leading the resistance. So that really spoke to me, you know, really, like, I suppose working in Amnesty, you hear a lot of really horrifying experiences people are going through, but for some reason that stayed with me, and I stayed in contact with, yeah, I was following that struggle over there. And I get into working with another human rights organization up in Belfast, and was there a couple of years, and then I decided I needed to go and see for myself, like, what was going on, how communities were suffering under these imposed mining projects. So I traveled out to Latin America, and the idea was, I started in Uruguay, and the idea was to travel up to Guatemala, visiting different communities along the way. So I visited different communities in Argentina, Bolivia, and when I got to Peru, actually I got to Cajamarca, which was at the time, like, they were going through a struggle against what would have been the largest gold mine in all of Latin America, against the largest global gold producer, it was Newmont Mining. So, and they just lost, just a couple of months before I got there, they lost 5 members of their community because of police brutality. So So I went to visit that community, and I suppose I fell in love with the place and the people, and I saw a role for myself there, for like reporting in English what was going on, you know, because the company was based in the United States, and not many people there knew what was going on. So I spent actually the next 5 years living and organising with the local people, and then also reporting where I could, you know. And it was while I was there that I connected back home to some activists here who were organising in the Sperrins, and we did like a solidarity exchange between communities in the Sperrins and Cajamarca. And that was when I first found out about what was going on in the Sperrins, you know, being in Peru. So yeah, when I eventually came home then 5 years later, I got involved more intensely in the campaign in the Sperrins, and I started working them for Friends of the Earth, like on their extractivism campaign and organising. And as Bernadette said, we were organised a conference we brought over with the Latin America Solidarity Centre, brought over some people. Gustavo Castro, actually also from Mexico, came over, who was with Berta Cáceres when she was killed, and he was left for dead as well. And then also from Romania and different parts of Europe. So, you know, just understanding that this is a global fight, you know. The imposition of this extractive model is more deeply and intensely felt in the global south, but also, as Ramon was saying, along the peripheries of Europe, you know, such as Ireland and Scandinavia, Serbia. You know, these are also sacrifice zones, and within these countries, it's normally the rural communities who are suffering. So yeah, Bernadette talked about then the formation of CAIM, Communities Against the Injustice of Mining. So we saw more and more prospecting licenses popping up and expanding, you know, to a quarter of the country, and you know that 25% in the north and 28% in the south. Like in the north, that could go up to 70%, according to the Department of the Economy, because they have intensely mapped the whole of the north, and basically 70% is up for sale. And in the south, they're just finishing their mapping project. And both governments, north and south, regularly go to the mining industry, and there's this PDAC conference that happens in Canada every year. And our governments go over and basically sell Ireland as open for business, I call it. It's really like up for sale, basically. Both states are extremely facilitative of the mining industry, so much so that there's this it's called the Fraser Institute, and they basically I know rank countries and how attractive they are to the mining industry, and the Republic of Ireland is currently #1 in the world for policies that are attractive to the mining industry, and the North is #3. So it just kind of shows the extent of their open door policy. So yeah, communities across the island are organising. We have, I see Jar here from Leitrim, and Rose from Inishowen, and Tony, and so like we have a great a great sense of community. And recently over the summer, Ramon was here, and Emma from South Dakota as well. We were supposed to welcome more visitors from Dakota, our Lakota and Ojibwe friends that were supposed to come over, but because of COVID, they couldn't. But we went ahead and we had events in Leitrim, in the Sperrins, and in Inishowen, and it was a real show of solidarity, both, you know, within the island, but also globally. So, you know, that's their strength in, as the kind one say, ni yarko karlikila, you know, so there's strength in unity. I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Linda. Can I just ask you, before I move on, can I just ask you, like, when you say 25% of Ireland, we're talking here about prospective licensing. Is there any actual mining already up and running? Are we still at the prospecting stage? And secondly, the legalities around that. So is there a second phase where a license is actually granted to extract? So at the moment, we're talking about licenses to prospect, is that right?
Yeah, so there are some mines already in existence. So there are some abandoned mines that are continuing to contaminate, such as in Lisneen and Tipperary. But the active mines, so there's Tara in Navan, Tara Mines, which is the biggest zinc mine in Europe. It's been operating for
Many years.
many decades now, and they hope to have another 70 years, you know, of expansion. So there's Tara Mines, there's Cavanagh gold mine in Oma, and there's the gypsum mine in Monaghan. And that's also massive and wanting to expand. So I suppose like these mines, because they're here for so long, like once mining companies get in, it's very hard to get them out. And whenever these mines started, there wasn't as much awareness of the hugely damaging effects of mining. Now, because of all these solidarity networks and because of the internet, it's very easy to see what mining brings, and communities don't want it. So organising the earlier, the better, basically. And so also a huge mine that's normally not considered a mine is the sand extraction in Lough Neagh, which has also been going on for many decades. Sand mining, and it's destroying the loch basically, and has been irregulated for many years, and it's just recently been given permission. So, and then one that's also further than prospecting is in the Sperrins, where they have submitted a planning application after many years of prospecting. And so the stage that is at is that we're awaiting the public inquiry. So they've submitted a plan application like 10,000 pages long, and then another like two additional addendums with another 20,000 pages, you know. So the community is there, and we can talk a bit about that.
I'm sorry, what's the mineral there they're looking for?
So it's gold, but now they're saying copper as well, because they want to get in on the whole greenwashing, green mining kind of craze. But it's not a copper mine, they would have to completely reapply if it was copper, you know. And yeah, so they're waiting then on that public inquiry to decide if that is given the go ahead. And then we have all the prospecting then, which, you know, isn't just like, you know, helicopter or soil samples, like it also includes drilling.
Yeah.
And there's 700 mines across, or 700 drills across the Sperrins, which has caused contamination and floods and landslides and everything. So prospecting isn't this benign act that they want you to believe, you know.
Yeah. And I suppose that's similar to the experience of fracking. Yeah, when they're
Yeah.
Ireland, yeah. Can I just ask? I'm conscious this question's coming in already from our participants here, and I'll certainly be getting to those. I just a couple of more, if people can bear with me. I have a couple of questions to ask, maybe Ramon or Bernadette. So I'm wondering, for example, how can rural resistance movements such as the ones you work with respond to the power? I think Linda has already talked about this, is the kind of power of corporate entities, which is sometimes very opaque, and the relationships between the state and those entities is not always clear to us as citizens. And, you know, there's different layers. I think you've referred to it there already, Linda, how we kind of best sort of respond to that in terms of kind of unpacking or challenging that power. Do you want to say something about that, Ramon, maybe? Or anybody? Your mic is still on. Your mic is still turned off there. Thank you.
It's a good but very complex question, because there's a lot of like the relations between corporations, governments, and civil society actually are very, very hard to sometimes even to understand, because they are opacious or they are just illegal sometimes. So there is a lot of like, in some cases, repression. Linda said something about it actually. So I think that in the case of the lithium, but also other minerals actually in Latin America and in Chile, the problem has always been like, the big influence that corporations have on the governments. Actually, I'm just writing something about, for example, how the largest lithium corporation in Chile has been involved in the illegal funding of political campaigns, including 2 presidents, including a socialist president, Michelle Bachelet, kind of. So it's like, but what's the problem? I think, from my perspective, from my experience, is that today, since there is a lot of criticism, and since these corporations and the states also see actually how civil society actually articulates and organizes, they also respond. I mean, there is always a response, right? A reaction. So, so when we act, we need to always like foresee the reactions. Otherwise, we are almost working for them, because we are telling them exactly what they need to do to validate themselves, in territories at a national level or at an international level as well. So when we denounce it, for example, extractivism in indigenous territories, in the Andean salt flats, let's say, what corporations did, it's like create so-called participation process, create greenwashing campaigns. They are articulated now with the EV industry. So now, actually, I want to show you something. Maybe now it's the moment. It's an example of how actually, look, you're seeing this, right? So in response to criticism on green extractivism, the European Union, for example, creates this European Critical Raw Materials Act. So they create fake participation process like this, like call for evidence. Which kind of evidence? How can you validate actually this process or this information as a democratic process? Anyways, like they create this. They create these sort of initiatives, for example, European Union, Latin America Convention on Raw Materials,
Yeah.
This is part of like a partnership. This is not a partnership, of course, There is no like equal relations of power. So you cannot have a partnership here, between.
So would you engage in dialogue with these consultations, or would you boycott them essentially, or?
Actually, locally the governments do the same, and today we just don't participate at all. We call for boycotts all the time to different initiatives like this. We call for boycotts, actually, like small boycotts to seminars and congresses, like academic congress, actually, that are happening like every week or every month, with also like a pro-extractivist academia, actually, because that exists. That's actually the norm. So we are also very marginal in our positioning. So I think that's actually, this is what, I don't know if you've read Judith Verbeyen and Alexander Dunlap's work about the social engineering of extraction. So we call it like social engineering of dispossession. And the speech or all this, the idea of governance, for example, that has been spread all over the world today, and it's a very like neoliberal conception of what should be like territorial management, territorial control, territorial autonomy. So now it's being replaced by this concept of governance or resource governance, which is even more violent, because it's not even recognizing the territory and its complexity, but it's reducing everything to a raw material or to a resource, so-called resource, a commodity, a mineral. That's why also actually we reject the term lithium triangle, for example, because it's not a triangle at all, first of all, but also because it's not a lithium anything. It's a super rich territory. It's super complex, and so reducing also territories as like the lithium something, it's all.
And I mean, these places are sacred places for many people as well. Wouldn't that be right? So yeah, or commodifying nature in a way.
Nature and communities,
The land.
Lands, but then actually, maybe just to close with this idea, is that actually these strategies are also successful. Like we can analyze them, we can denounce, we can actually organize against these strategies, but they have a lot of power. So they create these regulations, so-called regulations in Europe. They create, I don't know if you've heard about IRMA, the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, being created by the mining industry to regulate voluntarily mining industry itself, instead of respecting national regulations. So there is a whole, network that operates in favor of extraction.
Yeah, so it's
and they actually also use, and this is like really like the last idea, is they use also like the social vulnerabilities in the territories, because people need to work, people need to have an income, especially in this crisis, where everyone is actually struggling. And in the middle of, this inflation world, global inflation moment, everyone needs to cover, their lives and look after their families and their future, our futures. So they also use that context. They understand, they study in detail what are people's values, what are people's fears, what are people's needs, and they come with an answer. And in countries like ours, these are answers that the state never actually gives. So it's the corporations actually become like the providers of solutions.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
And that's even more complicated.
Yeah,
that makes it more complex.
Yeah, it's very interesting. But so the response then has to be very strategic as well. But there's quite a few questions coming in, so maybe I'll take a few of them and we can pick up. Let's see. So there was a point there, and I think maybe relates to what you were talking about earlier. It's a question from Patrick, just to say, interesting to consider the history of mining in Ireland, especially since the 1960s, and how this might suggest a deeper and longer continuity with other former colonies across the global south. So I suppose maybe seeing it as part of that relationship. If anybody wants to comment on that.
I'd like to just say on that point that you were making. I think it's, I think there's a lot that we can do, actually. I think, we really need to move, politically away from, a really high growth economy that we're in. If we keep mining the way we're mining, we're going to be mining over the next 30 years the same as we have over the last 70,000. I mean, the earth can't keep delivering that, and we need political leaders that are going to bring us to more of a low growth economy, to recycle economy on a large scale recycle. We also need to decolonize, because you can't, I mean, it is another form of colonization, allowing these big corporations and companies to come in and mine us and pollute our water, our land, and then just leave with the profits, And we have to stand up to our governments that are allowing this to happen. you know, because it's just for profit that that's happening. We're not, you know, we are not going to benefit from that. A lot of the Scandinavian countries now are talking about, you know, how we could be recycling all these metals, and we certainly don't need gold. You know, at the moment there's huge amounts of gold in the world. So, and also the processes around gold mining particularly is awful. You know, the cyanide that's used, the mercury, all of this. So we need to be looking at international trade agreements like CETA, which, you know, KIME has started to ask all the different parties to, you know, stop, because that gives these outside mining companies huge powers once they get in, prospecting and investing even small amounts of money. They're going to have a right to continue, you know. So these are things we need to be working on here in Ireland, I think. And, you know, as well as that, up in Inishowen, we have, like, there's special areas of conservation all around the mining area. That's, you know, you just wonder how that's happening. So contesting on this is very important, I think, for communities, and taking back their own power, you know, because the governments, I mean, I suppose the Republic wasn't set up like this. It wasn't meant to turn out like a few people in power deciding this for us.
Yeah,
So
just very quickly, Bernadette, I have another question, and then I think Linda wants to come in there, but there was a question there for you also about, you mentioned Indigenous people's charters that have been written elsewhere.
Yes.
Are these available? Has there been any work done on similar charters for Indigenous rights here? So I'm wondering what people, when people say Indigenous, I get a little bit iffy myself around that when they talk about the Indigenous Irish, because who are they? That's a little bit exclusive. But anyway, that's another story. Any answer to that? And then I'll come to Linda.
I was looking at the charter that was set up by the Manitoba people in Manitoba. So I think if you Google that, you could find that. It's very interesting. They talk about their health, having their own governance. They also talk about the land and, you know, nature having as entities to be protected. And I think that sort of maybe Linda would like, you know, because that brings us into rights of nature. And
do you want to come in there? Yeah, thanks very much, Bernadette. Do you want to come in there, Linda? Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to say as well, like as an example of the fact that stopping these companies is possible. So obviously it's a huge task and, you know, a huge power imbalance. But through the people I worked with in Cajamarca, they were facing a $4.8 billion mining project, and in 2012 it was all set to go ahead, because of organized and dedicated and creative community resistance, that project was stopped, and that's coupled obviously with you know, national and international solidarity that they received, but I always look to them for inspiration that this can be stopped, you know. And there's a few documentaries that kind of tell the story of what happened. Is the Conga Project, if you search that, you know. Yeah, and then talking about what Bernadette was talking about the rights of nature. Yeah, that's another movement that's growing across the island, and I'm currently
Can you tell us a bit more about that? I mean, what for a layperson now, what is the rights of nature? Is that something coming from New Zealand or right across the world, or?
Yeah, so it has started in a few different places around the world, like some communities in the United States, but also Ecuador and Bolivia now have the rights of nature in their constitutions. India, Bangladesh, New Zealand, Spain as well have recognized the rights of one of their lakes. So basically it's just the way we have human rights. Nature also has a right to exist to be restored and to thrive. So it's like corporations will give corporations rights, and they're like fictions, basically, social constructs. Nature actually exists, and it's what we depend on to survive, you know. So yeah, it's I suppose it's rewriting the law to reflect our current reality, and the values that will bring us through these crises, you know. And in just a wee plug, like on the 11th of November, we're premiering the film that Ramon and Bernadette and Rose all featuring about the rights of nature, and how this movement is growing across the island, and how we can use the rights of nature as a tool to resist extractivism. You know, if the sperons had rights, if the freshwater pearl mussels, Ireland's only endangered species, if they had rights, if the Shannon had rights, like these extractive projects couldn't damage them so massively in the way that they are set to do, you know.
Very good. And if you could share that link to that film maybe, or that event through the different networks, CoLab and ourselves, we can. I see a couple of other points coming in here. Paul has made an interesting one. I think this is my colleague, Paul. He's saying, I imagine the industry-led research zeitgeist that heavily influences or directs universities is a major stumbling block in the struggle against corporate interests of the miners. How can academics and universities counter this? So that's putting us on the spot here, I think, or when I say us, I'm saying coming from an academic background. I don't know if anybody wants to respond to that. There's other questions. I could take a few more. Does anyone want to take that? Any quickly want to take that one? Have you found support, from universities, or do you find them reluctant to engage politically?
Actually, we have a problem in Latin America in general, but especially in Chile, because of the model that was imposed during the dictatorship, and we are still trying to actually change. Kind of like took a lot of the funding for research and for universities off, and that made actually these institutions, research institutions are very dependent on private donations, and actually that also created the environment for also the corporate capture of research and academia, let's say. Actually, that was a motivation for me actually to do my PhD, because at some point after my master's, which actually is in international studies, and it was in France. So after that, I thought that I never saw actually like an actual contribution from the academia actually to resolve the crisis actually. But then I met people who are involved in more critical and engaged actually research, and that's what I'm doing now. But anyways, I think that it's not easy in countries like ours. I don't know how it is in Ireland. Maybe you are doing something from the university. These kind of like spaces are not very common in many places in Latin America. In Mexico, it's a little bit more open. But I think that anyways, we have like the ones who decide to follow this path, let's say, we need to actually engage with change, with social change, but with structural change. So in Latin America, we have like a lot of a big tradition of critical research, participatory research, things we do with local actors and communities. We have also like popular education, like Paulo Freire and others, big scholars. And I think that that's what we need to do everywhere, kind of, not from a colonizer perspective, of course, but adapted to each reality, but with this thinking of thinking that all or dialogue of knowledges, like Boaventura de Sousa Santos writes about it. It's kind of all knowledges are equal, are valuable, not only one perspective, and all actors know things that deserve to be taken into consideration.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, certainly in Ireland, my fear would be that the rush to embrace, the green economy or green growth, when there's a lot of funding now going into that it may become depoliticized. So I think we have to be keeping an eye on that all the time, who's driving the agenda and, what might sound good in terms of tackling climate change, how is that going to impact, and obviously you've told us about lithium and so on, and other rare earth minerals that are being sought now. I have a couple of other questions. Maybe we can take them here. Quite a lot coming in. There was a reference to the inequality of power that corporations hold vis-a-vis local communities. This is more of a point. One counterbalance is trade unions. Whilst they may be seen as protectionist in relation to jobs, in the 1970s, Australian construction unions introduced green bans, for example, refusing environmentally damaging construction. Could the same methodology be deployed by engaging with unions to persuade them and or the workers to boycott mining? So reaching out to, workers, reaching out beyond, I suppose, narrow environmentalism. And I think there is a lot of commonality. I don't know if anybody wanted to pick up on that, Linda or Bernadette.
Yeah, I think unions are important. It's the whole idea of just transition and transitioning from extractivism to like a life-sustaining society means supporting workers to transition as well. So, it's the companies that are doing the damage, and workers shouldn't be demonized, I suppose. But in saying that, in many places it isn't local workers anyway, they come promising jobs and so-called development and all that there, but it's normally the highly skilled work is from people from outside of the region. So, and maybe even for a short time as well. So it isn't this job creator that it's supposed to be,
Yeah. Did you want to comment on that, Bernadette, from your experience, or how is it engaging with maybe, when you're working in Donegal? I mean, obviously you're saying communities are concerned, but are different people responding, farmers, fisher folk, or whoever? I think you've mentioned some of these groups are. I think your mic is off, Bernadette.
In Donegal at the moment, there's a huge crisis with mica.
Of course, yeah.
And it's at the moment, it's just affected so many people, and it's people who spent their whole life building their homes. It's just the whole thing is sort of in disarray, and with regard to say that crisis, there's more people that don't know if they've mica than we know of, and there's about 5,000 that we know of. So there's an awful lot of feeling that people here have been left behind. Also, we don't have a good public transport system in Donegal, no train service, and we hear a lot about switching to electric cars and that, but really we need a really good public transport system in Ireland, and that should be one of the first things, I think, that would counteract an awful lot of the mining, because there wouldn't be as much mining required if that was the case.
Yeah.
So it's a policy that maybe we all need to start thinking about. I know people here have been talking about it for a long time on different levels, different reasons, but I think it's a really important thing for the whole country. But, particularly up here, because we have zilch kind of public transport. Yeah. So that's one thing. And I think, with these different types, it's not that jobs are going to go away. It's about creating more sustainable work, and
Yeah.
also a more caring society.
Mhm. Yeah, and rethinking models of progress, like
Yes.
this idea that everybody should have an electric car, you know, it's just a green consumerism, but maybe, as you say, by having better public transport, there wouldn't be the need for all these cars in the first place. Let's see, I have a couple of good questions, a couple of points coming in. Sorry, we'll keep moving here. Okay, comment from Rose about relationships in rural communities are amongst our greatest strengths. Maybe what you're talking about there, Bernadette. A question from Shane: what locations around Ireland are most likely to be affected by mining extractivism practices? Well, I think, Linda, you've indicated a few in the north. Is there others in the south that we haven't heard of so far tonight?
Yeah, well, I suppose the you know, the areas where there is prospecting and where there are groups organising. Also, we have Inishowen, Connemara, Leitrim, Wicklow, Clare, the Sperrins, obviously, and I'm sure there's some more. So that's just where there is groups organising, but as you said, like 20% of the country, which could rise drastically too. So I don't think you can nowhere is safe, really. You know, they're selling off the whole country. But yeah, there are there's public money went into the map in the country, and you can see the map and you can see all the different areas where there are all these different minerals. It's like the Geological Survey Northern Ireland has mapped the north and the border regions, and now the Geological Survey Ireland is completing the south of the Ireland map. So you can see there where the particular kind of minerals and metals are, but it's really over the whole country.
Yeah, and a question from Rosie: has there been examples of organized labor opposing mining, either within communities of resistance or in solidarity on sites? We're not sure if that's in Ireland, but maybe in Latin America. I'm not sure. That's examples of organized labor. I'm not quite sure. So would that be miners or other forms of labor? I'm not quite sure. You can think about that one. From Derbla, as far as I'm aware, they're still take submission for the Biodiversity Citizens Assembly until November, and people could ask that a legal basis of rights of nature be part of that, of their recommendations. That's very interesting. So by going to the website of citizensassembly.ie, there's a section there on biodiversity submission. So that could be an avenue there, as you suggested, to build. I think that's very interesting.
And can share afterwards, Tom, the Environmental Justice Network Ireland have put together a submission to the Citizens Assembly on the rights of nature and the connection with biodiversity loss. So that can be shared after for like inspiration for people if they did want to reply or make a submission.
Excellent, yeah, really good. So from Patrick, could the panel talk a bit more about the similarities and differences between the social and political context in Chile, Latin America and Ireland, and the way trans-local solidarities are being cultivated?
Mhm.
So the importance, I guess, of this, you know, learning from each other, learning from, you know, alliance building, this dialoguing, you know, of resistance groups and so on, social movements between North and South, or even within Latin America or elsewhere. How important is that?
Maybe I can comment something. Yeah, for us, for example, it's been like the creation of this of our network, which is OPAL, like the Plurinational Observatory of Indian Saltflats, was actually in response to the expansion of lithium mining. So we kind of like realized that we were living, experiencing similar process across the borders, kind of, you know. So these borders are just, I mean, I don't know if you agree with me, but I see it this way, but as imaginary as the border in Ireland. So you say like the north and the south is like who, I don't know when, why, how. And it's the same in Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, because this region actually has been inhabited by indigenous peoples like since like way before actually these countries were created. So I don't know if in 200 years Ireland will be the same, but these borders are like 200 years, like the oldest. Actually, they changed actually 130 years ago because of a war, because of saltpeter. So Britain is actually involved there also in this. So basically, I see like a lot of similarities. Sometimes we have like imperialism and same imperialisms actually, because saltpeter and nitrates was controlled by Britain, and so that's how actually the territory, some territories actually after the war are part today from of Chile, others Bolivia, you know. So yeah, so there's always this this geopolitical, you know, process and foreign interests. And the story kind of like repeats, you know, again and again. And there's always like territories and peoples that are in sacrifice. Linda used the term sacrifice zones. So I think that we have like we are in sometimes we find ourselves in the same, you know, periphery. And for me, for example, was something new to realize that all these actually realities existed in what it's called Europe or the European Union or former European Union in the case of territories controlled by the UK, let's say. But yeah, so I think that we have a lot of things in common. And just to life, not to mining, actually, it's a network, as international solidarity network, actually, that has helped everyone to realize that in the context, actually, of this renewed, you know, capitalism, which is trying to be like seen as green or more responsible or whatever. You know, we really need to organize internationally. We really need to understand what's going on in different parts of our continent, on other continents in the world, and kind of like work on common responses to this. Because now it's really late. Like I don't want to be alarmist. I don't know if the word, but it's really late. So we really need to do something about this. Otherwise, actually, in the context of this climate crisis, actually, it's going to be probably like it is probably the last chance we have to change this model.
Yeah. Did you want to come in there, guys, or Linda, or on that?
Yeah, just to underline the importance of solidarity between communities, you know, whether that's like locally or globally, you know, like all communities involved in crime, you know, have shared like each locality has a different context, even though we're on the same island, you know, and you know, it's maybe a different mineral, a different company, you know, a different local reality. So but there are common strategies that we can share, and the mining industry uses the same strategies. So by learning from each other, you know, we can be better prepared and also gain inspiration from each other, and that includes then global solidarity, especially with communities in Latin America and other parts of the global south who have been through much more intense forms of extractivism for a long time, you know, and have developed, like, you know, the resistance coming from Latin America is hugely inspiring. So yeah, just that kind of, yeah, as Patrick was saying, trans local connections are hugely important.
We were lucky enough to meet the Sabatista women that came to Ireland about a year ago. We met them, and what I found really interesting talking to them is how they brought about their democracy and how it works and sort of the workings of it, and it's non-hierarchical. They sort of have what we would call politicians, but they're up to a 3-year term, but they're not paid, if you know what I mean. They're kind of seconded during their role, but they have to listen to the communities at all times. So they have really, like, it's from the bottom up instead of with ourselves. It's becoming very top down.
Yeah.
So I think we can learn a lot from people that have had
Gone through similar struggles. Yeah.
Through so much.
Yeah, and there's a long history of that. I mean, Ramon, you mentioned several times, you talk about the crisis of capitalism. Is there a danger, though, in South America, from my limited understanding, that some left-wing governments in Latin America have also engaged in policies of extractivism once they've got into power? Isn't that something you've struggled with, and Indigenous groups particularly have felt marginalized in that? Or are things changing now a bit? There's a new wave of left-wing governments in Latin America. Maybe they've learned from the past, but
that's a very good question, because
or is that maybe
actually now that Lula got elected in Brazil, there's been like a map of left, right, and like rolling in social media. I don't know if you've seen it. So it's then there was one, and then different versions. The first version actually put Cuba, Venezuela as a dictatorship, for example, and others like left, So some people ask whether progressive governments are really left governments. And I don't know if you know Maristela Vampas. She's from Argentina. Her work about neo-extractivism and how she kind of like conceptualized this form of extractivism that is justified by social welfare.
The state, yeah.
Right. So it's very characteristic of the left or progressive governments, right? In the 90s, in the 2000s. And in Mexico, for example, AMLO, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, is being really criticized because he's kind of like contributing to the expansion also of the extractivist model in the way that many governments in South America did before. So today in South America, I think it's a bit different. And for example, Gabriel Boric in Chile, he calls himself an ecologist, politician, an ecologist, the first ecologist president.
Yeah.
But then
in Colombia as well, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that he's much more critical than ours, actually, because he's been like speaking a lot. For example, like taking a very critical position on the global climate agenda. He's been actually calling out North global governments for like asking for climate justice. For example, like he's been speaking about the sovereign debts and the need, for example, the condemnation of the sovereign debts for climate action locally. That's something that our president doesn't do. But I think that there is at least the intention, actually, of hearing indigenous peoples, of hearing local communities, of hearing scientists, actually. Then in the practice, I think it's much more complicated than that. And again, like the lobby, the boycott, actually, the actual boycott to the governments that go against, that actually go against private interest, it's an actual thing, actually. It's not just like a conspiration theory. It is going on. I don't know if you've seen like the news in Brazil, like the right wing mobs actually going to the streets and blocking
block the roads, yeah.
Blocking the roads to the airports, provoking chaos, you know. Asking, I just saw actually a couple of minutes ago, people going to the military quarters to ask the military to go out, you know, to go to the streets and asking for a coup d'etat, you know. So yeah, so I think we can be like super radical and move forward in an incredible way, but there's always the reaction, and we always need to be prepared for that. So yeah, so I think that, yeah, we want to go there. In that sense, we think that maybe we go much further with resistance movements and process than in other parts of the world, maybe. But we also need to be prepared, and we face the reactions. So that's the consequence. And maybe I don't know. This is something, just to finish, that came up like conversations in Germany, in Berlin, also in Serbia. Sometimes people feel that they don't have much to lose, or as much as us. You know, we feel that we really need to do something. We need to be radical. We need to act, because the machines are there, or the crisis is there. You know, and some people live in a more comfortable way in other parts of the world. And they don't feel that need to act, you know, in the same way. So maybe this dialogue is kind of like a contribution to change that, actually.
Yeah, thank you, Ramon. That's very interesting. I'm just conscious of the time. We'll be probably drawing to a close fairly soon. A couple of other points, just bringing it back again to Ireland. Somebody's come in now about Caroline has just mentioned again about the Citizens Assembly on biodiversity, and great to get something in on the right to nature. They're meeting twice more, once this weekend, if somebody wants to get something in by, and once more. There's been no hard set end date. They've just been telling us that getting something in before this weekend would be great. The best. It could be just a quick email to ask for one thing. So all submissions, no matter how small, are welcome. So that's the Citizens Assembly on biodiversity, and an opportunity there. And Linda has shared obviously the documentary there about the documentaries you mentioned, Open Pit. Shane has asked again about electric vehicles. Are they a viable alternative considering the intensive destruction caused by mining lithium? I mean, I think we've touched on that. Unless, do you want to say a bit more about that, or? I'm just conscious of the time. Anybody quick one on electric vehicles? Do they have a role to play, or should we be looking elsewhere? I think Bernadette, you've made it very clear that there's a need for more public transport, whatever we do. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on. I have just a question then, like, I suppose to draw it to an end, really. I mean, is it possible, like, you know, coming back to this theme of acts of citizenship, yeah, what can I say, really? There's so much. I mean, we've learned so much from tonight in terms of, and I think this dialogue, obviously, in terms of even just talking to each other tonight. Would anyone like to comment on that? Like, do you see it as a new form of active citizenship? I suppose moving on beyond, a little bit beyond that sort of traditional understanding of citizenship, you know, resistance as a form of citizenship. I don't know if any of you want to comment on that.
I think, you know, it goes back to the system, the whole system and the structure of the way we work. And it's a very patriarchal system. The values are very monetary. You know, caring professions, you know, aren't paid very well in this world, because the value is on, you know, finances and who's good at business rather than who's good at taking care in the community of people and of nature and of food sources and water sources and things like that. So, you know, I think that is a really important thing that we need to change. We need system change. We need, you know, societies that value and are caring of you know, the things that do help nourish us, that keep us well in society, that, you know, that we're not a sick society, you know, that we look after each other. And I think that's something that's very, very vital, and it's not really spoken too much about.
Yeah, I think you've really encapsulated it there, Bernadette. Yeah, what we value in society, and I think people do value, you know, beyond economics, but it seems that so much is driven by this idea of GNP, GDP, without looking at so many other things, and even looking at distribution of wealth, rather than always having to generate more and more wealth, even if it's so-called green growth or whatever they like to call it. Do you want to say anything else, Linda? Otherwise, I'm going to finish off, and then I'm going to hand back to, I think, Caroline from COLOB to wrap up this session tonight. I know I'd love to keep the discussion going, but you know, because it's so fascinating, but I think we're going to have to draw to a close. Do you want to say something, Linda, there? Come in.
Yeah, just talk about citizenship and stuff, and I suppose like the way I see it, like I love the framework of active hope, and like by Joanna Macy and others, and so basically active hope like framework said, like there's 3 pillars, you know. One is resistance, like holding back the destructiveness, the onslaught of the capitalist system, and that includes extractivism, industrial agriculture, and all sorts of bad shit. Then we have another pillar, system change. So, you know, changing our economy, changing our democracy, changing all the structures that hold up our society. And then the third pillar is consciousness shift. So changing our mindset, changing our story, you know, like what story are we living by? And so all these 3 together, we can work in one of these pillars, or sometimes what we do works across all 3 pillars, and it all contributes to changing, creating the world that we want to live in.
Fantastic. Yeah, really good. Joanna Macy there. Yeah, brilliant. So I'm going to hand back to Caroline. I just want to say personally, I've really learned a lot tonight, and thank you all for the discussion, and thanks for the excellent questions coming in, for everybody participating. Caroline, do you want to kind of say a few words just before we close?
Yes, Tom, thank you. Just second what you said. I learned a huge amount, and it's really got me thinking about the connections between this type of work and the work we do through development education, and that, like, engaging people in active citizenship. So there's a lot of food for thought, and I'm sure everyone will agree with such a rich conversation. So thank you so much to Linda, Ramon, and Bernadette for speaking, and Tom for the wonderful coordination and hosting of it. You really brought everything together and got a lot of questions answered. So thanks so much for that. I guess for next steps, we will be sending out Aga, by the way, who works with myself and COLOB. I just want to give her a shout out, because she puts a lot of work into organising this event. She works really, really hard, and she wears so many hats, and she's multitasking behind the scenes here tonight, tweeting and handling everyone's questions and so on. So Aga, through the next number of days, will be communicating back with everyone. She'll be sending you back an email and some links to various resources. She'll also be putting a link to this talk up on YouTube, and she'll be doing other wonderful things like creating a newsletter and so on, which we would love you to all sign up to if you haven't signed up to our newsletter. And if you follow us on our social media, Twitter and Facebook and so on. And also we'll be doing our final first Wednesday and the first Wednesday of December. So you can look out for that too, and perhaps sign up to that. I think that's more or less everything. And just, yes, thank you everybody for coming along and participating and staying the course. And lovely to see everyone, and hope to see you at the next one. Thank you.